everyone, I'm SXNoir. Welcome to my radical corner of the simulation. You're listening to the Thot Leader Pod, and yes, you heard that correctly, THOT. I started the Thot Leader Pod to destigmatize and demystify topics in sex tech. In each episode, we are holding space for authentic conversations with thought leaders about how we navigate developments in the sex technology industry. My intention for this space is radical thoughtfulness. I believe empathy is the key to intimacy in digital space. This podcast aims to unpack how sex tech enhances our human experience. Are you ready? You're listening to the Thot Leader Pod. Hello, everyone. This is SXNoir, and this is the Thot Leader Pod. And yes, you heard that correctly. It is THOT. Today, we're going to be talking about everything sex technology. And I have the most amazing guest with me, Raquel Savage, who is an all-around badass. And we're going to let her introduce herself. I am SXNoir, the thought leader of sex technology. My work has intersected in sex technology and sex work. And I'm really just very interested in the future of sex technology. I am the current president and CEO of the Women of Sex Tech. And I hold a lot of hats, a lot of things, but today I am just the host of an amazing conversation that I'm bringing to you all today. So each week we will discuss with thought leaders about their lives and how their work intersects with sex tech. And this podcast is built on empathy and how we can use digital experiences to enhance our physical experiences in real life. And so my pronouns are she and her. And without further ado, I'm going to have Raquel Savage introduce herself.
Hi, folks. I am Raquel Savage, pronouns she, her. I am a therapist, sex educator, and sex worker. I also own a production company and run a nonprofit.
Listen, y'all, that's a lot. It seems like that's a lot. We wear a lot of hats, and those are a lot of badass hats, and I'm so excited to get into it. And so we have two segments here on this podcast called Food for Thought and Deep Thoughts. So Food for Thought is a segment where we get some background on our guest and what led them to the work they're doing. I think it's really important in digital space that we build empathy by sharing who we are and what we are and what brings us to the career that we're navigating. And so I want to ask you, just who is Raquel Savage? And where are you from, and kind of what has brought you to do all those amazing things you just mentioned?
Yeah, who am I? That's such a big question. I feel like I'm many things. I think the most that I embody, I guess, would be like businesswoman and slut. And therapist. I mean, I guess that's like a piece of it too, but I feel like under the slut umbrella, it's like emotional labor. And that kind of is what turned into therapist later on. But yeah, honestly, when I look back at my life and how I got to this point, almost none of it was super intentional. Like I was never like, I'm going to do this and then become this and then eventually will be this. It was just like, all right, bitch, well, what is next? Okay, here we go. And thinking about, what felt the most authentic at the time and what I wanted to do. I think now that I'm 30 this year, and I think one of the things that I have reflected on, especially in talking to my parents, who, because of the pandemic, are now having to rethink their careers. They're 60 plus. So like rethinking a career at that point is entering like the job field at that point. It sucks, but right. It also it brings this like full circle moment, because when I first graduated from undergrad, I could not find a job. And they gave me such shit about, like, can't you just walk into a place with your resume and get a job? I'm like, sis, it is not the 60s.
No.
That's not how that works no more. And they gave me so much shit. And ultimately, that's what kind of kickstarted everything. And yeah, that's what got me into sex work, is like, what am I good at? What can I do? What can I charge people for? What's something that I can actually get fucking paid for right now? And then it just kind of built from there in many different ways. But one of the really important things I've been reflecting on is that at every single point of my life, I did what I wanted to do and not what I was supposed to do or what they were telling me I ought to do or anything like that. It was like, I'm not working jobs I hate. I'm not working for people who treat me poorly. I'll figure it out on my own. And it's so interesting because in the time period when you're actually figuring it out, it's not like they weren't supportive, but it's kind of like they're weary and they're like, all right, well, we'll see what my daughter is doing. But now that I'm like a successful businesswoman, they're like, oh, we always knew it was going to work out. Like,
That's how it always is, right?
You know what I mean? So yeah, so really what ended up happening was I graduated from undergrad with a communications degree, and I wanted to just be like a famous journalist or TV host or something, like a Lala Anthony kind of a thing. That is impossible to just like break into as a random person in Maryland. And someone told me, someone who worked at a news station was basically like, what's your thing? What's your niche? What is your fucking thing? And I was like, I don't know. I just want to be famous. And they were like, we need to find a thing. Otherwise, you're a sea of so many people. And so that question stayed with me for a couple of years. And in that same time, I started doing full service work out of my house, which I would never fucking do now. But when you first start, you just don't know what you're doing.
Right.
Started doing full service work out of my house, and I was getting clients from Twitter. At the time when I started Twitter, I had just an anonymous like sex account. Like that's how my Twitter started, was like an anon account, just tweeting freaky shit. And I was gaining a following doing that. So it was like, that's people. And it's so funny because I didn't post pictures of myself. So people didn't know. Men are so stupid. Anyway.
Well, that's kind of the thing in like the whole sex worker Twitter, right? Is like, you know, it's not a model because her face is blurred and like, you know, it's cut off and it's like all this privacy that goes into it. And men don't care. They're just like, oh, a hot body. Yes.
I'm coming to fuck that. I don't care. Yes. It's like, okay. And yeah. And so essentially I started as like a non-sex account. And then I started like posting maybe little pictures of like my face here and there. I did like a post and delete. And then after I was like feeling myself and like my following was growing, I was like, bitch, I'm just gonna move to Miami and like become a Black China stripper hoe, and I'm gonna be whatever. And again, just what I wanted in the moment. So I packed literally everything that I owned in my car, drove to Miami. I didn't even have a fucking apartment. I just found one when I got there. And literally it's like, what's the phrase? And it's a wrap from there, but like that was the beginning of everything. Yeah. And then I basically, the evolution was, I did start posting my face and like my body, and I started talking more about myself. I became one of those like ZD girls when ZD on Twitter was doing the like post a pic of your pussy, I was like one of the main bitches doing that, getting attention. I made a Connect Pal when Connect Pal was a thing, doing online sex work. Started seeing clients in Miami, started to get a following to the point where I could pretty much exclusively see celebrity and athlete kind of clients. Then I started talking more about like feminism stuff and like hating men. I think my first identity outside of like the sex thing was like, everyone knows I'm the bitch who fucking hates men. Right. So I started doing like education around that. And at the same time, I was like, well, what do I really want to bigger do with my life? And I was like, cool, I'll become a sex therapist. So I went back to school, got a master's in counseling. And then I started to talk about mental health kind of related shit more on my Twitter and Instagram. And yeah, honestly, it just, like I said, none of it was really intentional. It was just this like snowball of me just doing what I wanted at the time, and I'm very lucky that it just worked out the way that it did. And I did become very successful. So
yeah. Okay. I think it's, you know, Raquel, we have not spent time in real life together before. I hope one day in the future that will happen. But I came across you on Twitter, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. You were one of the people who would clap back, who were unapologetically, I don't like men and all these things, but you had such a power and a strength of just owning yourself, right? And it was very rare for me to see someone who was a sex worker and was just so unapologetically open about sex work, especially when we do see the Black Chinas who say, I'm not a trick, but are you? It's like, I know you turned a few tricks before. And so there's this real hidden side to all of the entertainment and the celebrity and all of this that you were just like, this is the truth. This is the realness about it. And you really did create almost, an empire around it. And I find it interesting being friends with someone in a digital capacity, because that whole journey you just said, like I've seen that, and it's beautiful. And it's like, right, it just transcends and it grows. And, I wonder, without Twitter, like, how do you think Twitter truly impacted your growth as far as like being vulnerable, as far as not caring what the haters say, as far as educating people? Like, what is the impact of Twitter on your daily life, like emotions and all of that?
Yeah, so don't let me forget this question, because the one thing I do want to say is that I didn't even consider myself or know what a sex worker was until people on Twitter were saying, she's a sex worker who did it. And then I was like, oh, cool, I'm a sex worker. And then somehow I became one of the, like, let's talk to this person about sex work.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying very intentionally to move away from that now, because like, I don't want to be like an authority on sex work. I'm an authority on my own experience for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that, like, that was such an interesting revelation and evolution in my identity and online brand as well. Identifying as a sex worker, because it was really just like, I'm selling pussy and
right.
Here's my titties and butthole online. And then because I was also talking, I think about like things that were revolving around advocacy. And I think how you mentioned folks see this authenticity of me, which feels powerful, then it became kind of this whole thing. So that was not intentional either. It just was like, everything has been pretty organic. But Twitter is everything. Literally, quite fucking literally. I would not be where I am without Twitter. And in many ways, I do revere Twitter for that reason. I also hate Twitter, and it's fuck Twitter, gang for sure. So there's this like duality of absolutely it being the foundation for which I've been successful and have been able to evolve, not only as a person, but as a business person, in my career, my brand, my income, all of that. And it has also been such a toxic fucking place for sure. And yeah, and ultimately though, under like the bottom kind of line though is Twitter absolutely has been crucial in the creation and maintenance of my like brand identity.
I love that you said all of that, because I think it's hilarious. A lot of sex workers are on Twitter because it's one of the last mass big tech social media platforms that actually allow nudity, that allow adult content, etc. Sex workers who are doing like full service work are still pretty targeted on Twitter, but for the most part, you can reach a lot of people because it's not, it's because of their terms of service as well, but also just a lot of sex workers community wise are on Twitter. And I think that's super dope. Social media can be an incredibly toxic space. And, you are someone who's so open and honest about their experiences, which can create a target. And so it's great to see that you've turned this into making money, and not just out here being a Twittervist. I think I love that you spoke about this kind of the people self-appointing you as a spokesperson for sex work. That tends to happen a lot, especially in these marginalized communities. And I feel the same way. I feel like, I was just someone who spoke up about issues that impacted me deeply. And next thing you know, I'm the expert on sex work. And I think it's important to understand that, like, I'm the expert of my own experience, and I don't proclaim to know what's best for everyone. And so this is important with activists, and especially this intersection of like social media and people just feeling so righteous about their opinions and how it impacts other people. And we saw that happen with like Stormy Daniels when she tried to insert herself into the stripper conversation. Like, honey, you can't just go and speak for everyone. And so I respect that a lot, just acknowledging like this wanting to step back from this activism thing to go and do your own business shit. I've definitely over the last year have had real conversations with myself about what activism is and if I want to continue in the activism space, because that alone can be toxic. When people put you on this pedestal or put you on this stage and say, well, speak for me, and then they get upset when you don't say what they really want to say. Well, that's not my experience and that's not how I feel. And so, that's amazing. Oh, Raquel, I'm so happy to be here with you today. I was just like, I was telling our producer, RJ, I was like, oh, I'm so nervous. I'm so excited because, you're someone who I truly respect in this industry. I wanted to ask you in regards to food for thought of like, about the importance of friendship and solidarity within this industry. And this can mean sex work, this can mean doing OnlyFans, this can mean navigating your journey as a sex therapist. Like, what has friendship meant to you? And have you built any kind of really just life-changing friendships through this process?
Yeah. So just really quick for clarity, I just want to name that although I wanted to become a sex therapist, I did not and am not a sex therapist.
Okay.
Specifically because I am a sex worker and the requirements to become a sex therapist require you to be a licensed therapist. And I have no interest seeking licensure because of what possibly it could look like as a sex worker who is
Okay.
actively being a sex worker. So I am a therapist and I do regular mental health counseling. I call myself a coach, sex coach, trauma
Okay.
coach, whatever, because that gives me less boundaries for the work that I do. But I am a regular therapist. But sex therapist, because of Florida specifically, every other state, I could call myself a sex therapist. Florida specifically, their rules and regulations require certain things that I have not fulfilled. So if I were in any other state, I could call myself a sex therapist, but Florida does not let me. So I want to be clear about that, because that is actually one of the things that has been a let's drag Raquel point. So I like to make that very fucking clear. Friendship. Yeah. I mean, I think friendship and community is so important. And I feel like I talk about building community a lot and the importance of having support systems, not only within sex work, but in general, when I'm talking to people about anything mental health related. I think that because we're so individualistic in this country and there is so much internalized misogyny between women, that we do this thing. And as a result of trauma, we do this thing where we're like, well, I'm just gonna do it on my own. I don't need nobody. I'm gonna just figure it out and I'm gonna be cool. I'm gonna just be by myself. And that is not successful and does not ever work for anyone. And you'll be miserable. And I'm sure if you are someone who is like that currently, you are very unhappy. And the reality is we need people, not only because we are human beings and humans are social creatures and we quite literally rely on others and community to thrive and survive and feel okay and feel safe and co-regulate and all of that. It's also necessary just for like building rapport and camaraderie and networking and experiencing joy. And I feel I have made lots of associates at minimum from Twitter who are sex workers, and then some have become my close friends. And that has definitely been very important for me, not only just to feel supported as a human who does sex work, also just, again, to have those experiences where I can just be myself. I wrote a piece for Bitch Media, and I talked about that I organized a all sex worker yacht day. And one of the takeaways from that, from all of us, was that that was one of the first times in a while, or first time for some folks, where they got to spend an entire day talking about their life and their work with no restrictions, with no shame, with no fear. There was no walking on eggshells. We would go in and out of conversation talking about, oh, I'm hungry, or I want to drink, or pour a shot, and then be like, I was sucking the dick, and like that kind of thing. And that's not, especially as sex workers, we are not allowed that space. And so often we miss out on that. And so, yeah, it's really important to have community and friends, whether it's sex work related or not. That is just absolutely crucial. And especially for sex workers to have spaces where we feel safe and affirmed and seen, all of the things.
I've been an organizer for a few years now, specifically in New York City around sex worker rights. And I've built friendship with a lot of people. And one of the activists that I've grown friendship with is T.S. Candy. T.S. Candy is the founder of Black Trans Nation and just an all around badass, fucking amazing woman. And recently I did a project that launched on the 25th called But I Am Here. And we got to hang out all day. It was me, Kate Zinn, and Tiffany and we just hung out. We had food. I had drinks. They don't drink, but I had a drink. And she turns to me and she's like, "I've never done this." And I said, "What?" She's like, "I've never just hung out with other activists and just in a casual, no work, just let's chat and talk about it." Because within activism, we all carry, and I'm just speaking to myself, we carry our hearts on our sleeves, right? There's a reason why we're in this space. There's a reason why we're talking about it the way we do. And it's important for us to be able to express why we're here, right? So I like that point. And I just want to say, Raquel, you've been a great support to me in ways that in ways that saved my life, to be honest, and this was just simply checking in saying, "Hey, you all right? I see this happening. Are you good?" And it made me feel like, yeah, we do have a community, that this is not just today or tomorrow, this is life. And that we have to really reach out to each other. And even if it's just in a digital capacity, because it can feel incredibly isolating, the things we go through. But when we talk to others, we're like, "Oh, right. You feel that pain as well. You feel that hurt as well."
I was just going to say that you were talking about me feeling supported by me, and part of that being like simply just checking in. And one of the things I just want to name for any folks listening is that while Twitter has been an incredible space for growth and income and branding and all of that, one of the things that I learned last year and going into this year is that Twitter is not your community and Twitter is not your friends. And it is really important to have intentionally built off Twitter relationships, what I would consider like in real life relationships, because when things go left online, people aren't going to support you and they're not going to look out for you and they don't care about you. So yes, Twitter is awesome. Like I said earlier, just about like the duality. Twitter is awesome, great, wonderful, and it also really fucking sucks and is really toxic. So yeah, making sure that you're reaching out to folks and intentionally building relationships with people offline as well.
That's a great point, Raquel, because I couldn't agree more. And also during COVID right now, it's hard. Everyone's only on Twitter. Everyone's having these super bubbled relationships and friendships. And we're not seeing each other at the event anymore in New York. We're not seeing each other in these spaces. And I found with my own personal experience with cyberbullying and cyber stalking is it's triggering for people. And when people kind of see you go through that and they don't know you in real life and they don't know who you actually are and your character, they go, "Oh, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. I don't want to say anything to this person." And it's because it reflects what could happen to them as well, that they could also be a target. They can also go through this horrible situation and it can be devastating.
I think also as sex workers, it's really important to do this as well, because we have no idea when our online platforms could just be gone, especially as things are getting even more tedious with guidelines and rules and TOS and whatever the fuck. Our online communities can be gone in a second. So making sure that you have folks in real life to check in on you and vice versa.
Absolutely. Hi, Thought Leaders. On this episode, I wanted to bring your attention to an organization I am passionate about, Decrim NY. Decrim NY advocates and organizes to shape New York City state policy and public opinion around people in the sex trades. We seek to improve the lives of people who perform sexual labor by choice, circumstance, or coercion, people profiled as such, and communities impacted by the criminalization of sex work and sexual exchange. I support Decrim, and so should you. Please follow and donate to Decrim NY. You can find them on Twitter at Decrim NY or decrimny.org. Back to the show. Well, okay, Raquel, that was food for thought. So we are now going to go into deep thoughts. And so deep thoughts is a segment that is basically asking more about the journey. And I'm really interested in talking about the process of you leaving sex work. If this is something, you're open to talking about. know that it is so difficult to step away from sex work. And of course, it's the sex trade. So you kind of never really leave it. If hoe is life, you never quite leave the sex trade. You never quite leave this, transactional relationship situation. But something that I love about your story, being so open and honest about here's why I'm leaving, here's where I want to go, here's what I'm doing. And I'm going to take all those skills that I had and all my badassness and move it to something else to grow my business and to make money in different ways.
Yeah, I think in maybe 2017 or 18, I really just had so many bad experiences with men, not even sex work clients, just men in general, that my desire, and this is also an extension of my politic, right? Like my desire to engage with men in any capacity just started decreasing and dwindling. And I was just like, I'm not interested in having really any proximity to men. And it took me a couple of years to figure out what that would mean for full service work or just sex work in general. Like, am I not going to be a sex worker anymore? Am I not going to suck dick for money? What the fuck am I doing? And I think in addition to not wanting to have proximity to men anymore, I also wanted to make space for these other ideas that were in my head of things that I wanted to do with my life. And I didn't have time to do them, not so much because I was doing full service work, but because I was doing full service work with men, which is just a drain to your soul. So very slowly, I came to the decision that I was going to retire from full service work specifically and not do anything in person anymore. And it was really hard, I think, for a number of reasons, one of which, and at that point, I also named that what helped me make that decision was that I had other sources of income, namely online sex work was generating me enough income that I didn't need to rely on full service work anymore. So there's also that to be said as well. But it was difficult because being a full service sex worker was a part of my identity. Like an entire piece of my identity was like, do not breathe in my direction unless you're giving me money. And if I retire from full service work, that means that naturally has to shift. And that is not to say that men that I possibly would date, which I'm not dating men and don't plan to, but that they wouldn't be giving me money or gifts. It just means that it cannot be transactional in that way. And that's a whole new skill. I don't fucking know how people who date cishet men, bitches, I don't know how the fuck y'all do it. I don't know how y'all manage it. I don't know how y'all navigate it. I don't know how y'all get what y'all need or don't get what you need and then ask for your needs and then we don't get, it's too fucking much, bitch. I would much rather just do full service work. And then it's like, bitch, this is what the fuck I want up front. Either you're giving it to me or you're not. And then I'm either doing the labor or I'm not doing the labor. It's not like I'm going to do labor and then like hope for a watch or it's like, fuck, Jesus Christ. Anyway, so it was a part of my identity, right? So it was like a piece of my identity was no longer in existence. And I think that's a crisis piece for anyone, naturally, even if you have a good sense of self, a solid sense of self. So there was that. The other thing was it's full service sex work and doing sex work in person and building that kind of community was my entire social circle.
Right.
So now it was, I don't really have any friends because the people who I'd be hanging out with are going to be trying to do full service work. And it's almost like an addiction where it's like, if I hang out with them, I'm going to be doing full service work and I'm not going to ever fucking retire. So that means I have to have distance from them in order to really slow down and eventually stop doing full service work. So it was this like identity thing and this social, again, feeling isolated, right? Not feeling like I have a community piece to it as well. And also, I think a lot of grief, like when you lose someone, you lose something. It was losing. It felt like grief. I had a lot of grief that I had to work through. And so what I told myself was like, in 2019, I'm going to stop. And I gave myself like August as the stop date. And when August came around, I maybe worked a couple more times as like, okay, this is the last time. Really, there is something to be said about sex work and like it's parallel to the feeling of addictions because it was like, oh, I'm gonna do it one more time and then I'm done, kind of a thing. And then I did stop completely. And I think I'll say another thing that was helped make this decision was that I want to propel my career farther. And I know from experience, history, and evidence how much people target me, have dragged me, whatever the case may be, that it could be a legal issue for me as well. So I knew that I had to have space between having really sold coochie and not, so that in the event that I become more popular or more visible, that would not be an issue for me. So that there was that piece as well. And luckily, like a few months later ish, the pandemic happened. And then it was like, I'm definitely not seeing anybody during the pandemic, although niggas was trying for sure.
Absolutely.
There were a number of things that informed and like kind of prefaced me not wanting to do it anymore. It was, I think, a big shift in my life, and it was a great decision, and I'm happy with the decision, and I don't miss it. I don't regret it. And I also think that I'm living more in line with my politic and values now, because I talk so much about hating men and fuck men and like giving folks guidance around like how to decrease their proximity to men, and now I actually get to like live that fully and more authentically, that I really don't have any proximity to men, and I love that a lot.
It's like when you're a podcast host, you're not supposed to say after every time the person speaks, I just love everything you said. I know you're not supposed to say that, but I just want to say that every time because it's so true. I think it's like, it's an addiction, the sex trade, but almost just like you actually being able to survive under capitalism and actually being paid what you're supposed to get paid for your work. And so it takes so much power to go, you know what, I'm going to believe in myself in another way. And I found that like I had a very, very similar journey of me having to take a full step back from any type of sex work because of me wanting to grow my SXNoir. And I am now, the president of Women of xTech, which my secret sauce or something I really, really focus on and proclaim is my intersection of sex work and sex tech. I'm not shy about speaking about sex work, and I'm very unapologetic about it, but it's unsafe for me to actively be doing it while I am on such a platform and so visible, because people will target you, people will harass you, and that's their prerogative. But also it's just, it's a legal issue. It can be dangerous, right? If you're out there advertising or saying, oh, I'm here, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, this is a safety issue because people can be, let's just be honest, people can be really, really weird. And so while part of destigmatizing the conversation is acknowledging our background, acknowledging this is where we came from and what we're doing, also we get to move forward. We don't have to hold this on our shoulders for the rest of our career. So I think that I'm just so proud of you and all those strides that you make. It's amazing. So I also want to talk about what it's like to manage kink media, and also with your journey of, stepping away from men and stepping away from having a lot of male influence in your life, and what that means for growing this entertainment media, company that in theory is attracting male attention or whatever it may be. And then also want to touch on Zeph Wellness too.
Yeah. So it's interesting talking about like male influence and just men in general, because kind of what started Kink Media Group was men. Two things, I guess. The first was that I was approached a couple years ago about doing some kind of a reality show like about me and about my life, and we shot a pilot for it. Mm-hmm. And we tried to shop it around to different networks, and no one was interested because I was actively doing full service sex work. They were just like, we won't touch this, we can't. And of course, if I were white, that probably would have looked different, but whatever. And so
it would have been empowering.
Exactly. So like, oh, and she's a therapist. It would have been this whole fucking thing, right? But of course, yeah. So I was like, interesting, noted. Okay. I think also, so a whole other piece, I think, of my like identity and goes into like, I do what I want, is that I knew, because I am a slut and have always been a slut and have always been provocative and rebellious, that I have to be the head of my own shit so that I don't have to rely on people hiring me, because otherwise I would have never got hired. So like there's that as like an overarching theme as well, just to consider. And that plays into this Kink Media Group piece. This was the first time that I was like relying on others to give me an opportunity as opposed to just creating the opportunity for myself. And the doors were shut. They were like, no, we're good. And I was like, okay, noted. And then I went to Exotica in Jersey, and I had a conversation with Professor Gaia, shout out to her and Black Porn Matters, about her partner, and was asking him like, because he's just so like supportive and wonderful and amazing. And I'm just like, how did you kind of come to this point? And what was that journey like? And what kind of conversations you have with other men about being, you know, kind of the best version, least oppressive, actively working through shit, whatever the case may be. And we had a long conversation about that. And I went home that night and I was like, it would be really interesting to have Black men having conversations about some of this shit, like,
Mm-hmm.
but not facilitated by women or the labor having to be on women. So just men having the conversations. And I was like, the only place that this is being reflected is like the LeBron barbershop conversation, which is like all celebrity men. So that doesn't really reflect reality. And then it's also extremely homophobic and transphobic and misogynistic. So they're not actually like talking about culture pushing forward shit. They're just talking about regular Black men bullshit. So I was like, this has not been done. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a show where there's Black men unpacking issues. And it's going to be Black men who are actually actively doing things in the culture and are doing wonderful, amazing things. And
Mm-hmm.
so that night I woke up the next morning and I was like, I'm going to just make a production company and I'm going to have this Black men's show. And this also gives me the opportunity to produce my own reality show if I choose to do that. And then I don't have to ask anybody to produce it for me. And once that kind of clicked in my head, then it just grew from there. And I was like, this is Kink Media Group is going to be a production company for and by Black, queer, sex working people to create all kind of content and projects that they want to create. And I will executive produce things, which really just means I'll pay for things so that that can happen. And so that was kind of the catalyst, the beginning of it. And what ended up happening was I obviously came up with the idea for Discourse is the men's show. I obviously came up with that idea myself, and then I casted people and I came up with the topic ideas, and I ended up doing all of this kind of stuff around it. And then we shot it in New York, I think over a 3-day span, and I completely directed it as well, and ended up doing a lot of helping on the back end with the production, post-production. And I was like, I want to be a director. I want to do more actual producing. This is
Mm-hmm.
something that I had no idea I even had an interest in or any skill set in. And so here is just a whole new branch of shit for me to do, is not only executive produced by way of sponsoring these projects, but also
Mm-hmm.
being extremely hands-on and actively looking for other projects that I can direct and produce. So yeah, it's like and again, this was post retirement, right? So this was
Right.
after having made room for even new things to occur. And that whole thing has really been so incredible, I think, for me, because so much of the things that I do are no longer new. It's just the same shit over and over again.
Right.
So for me to have found an entirely new branch of my career interests, whatever, has been really fun for me. And unfortunately, that happened right at the start of the pandemic. So I haven't been able to fully do that yet, but I'm really looking forward in the future to being able to do more things where I'm actively directing and producing. So yeah, Kink Media Group, where we just made our YouTube page. We were on my personal Patreon for a year, but we just created a YouTube page so that we can move the stuff off of my personal brand and can start creating its own identity separate from me. We have 5 projects on that network. We have the Savage Life podcast, which is my podcast,
Mm-hmm.
Domination, which is Ashley Page and Duchess Desad. They
Nice.
do femme kind of conversations around kink, and they're amazing. Ms. Be Nasty has Be Nasty's Toy Box. So she's reviewing adult products and toys, telling you what you should get and what you should not. Sex Ed, which is another show of mine where I'm basically doing hands-on sex education. You want to
Mm-hmm.
know how to put a condom on a penis? I'm going to show you how to put a condom on a dick, not a
Yep.
banana. You want to know
Yeah.
about I'm going to spread open my pussy and show you here's a clitoris, here's the vagina hole. And then the last show is Discourse, which is a group of Black men and non-binary people talking about accountability, vulnerability, and a number of other things. That show is currently on hold because 2 of the cast members ended up being abusers, which is so ironic given
Mm-hmm.
the topics that were being discussed. So that show is on hold until we can figure out how to recast properly, and also just talk about accountability within the group about what happens when people get outed as abusers.
Mm-hmm. I'd love to chat about that because I wanted to ask you the importance of having platforms and companies of for us, by us, right? And what is that process of, if possible, restorative justice or just you managing people? You know, sex workers are some of the best managers, producers, and directors, period. And so for you to be in this position of leadership and not only holding your dreams and visions, but holding other people's dreams and visions in your hands as well. But how does that impact you personally? Do you have to do some inner reflecting? Do you do some reading? Is it just having patience and empathy? How do you lead groups and how do you lead the people who are working under you to be even better than they were when they met you?
A lot of patience for sure. I think one of the things that I have like taken away from this is that I now have like 10 kids basically. It's like a group of people now that I'm kind of overseeing. And I like to be clear with folks though that I'm trying to be a middleman kind of a thing, and I'm not like a tyrant or like this is what you're going to do. I'm trying in every area of my brand where I have people who I'm working with for whatever. I try to actively create professional relationships that feel differently than professional relationships that we're used to, meaning I'm not your boss in the sense that I'm going to tell you what to do. I have no interest in exploiting you. I have no interest in killing your dreams. I want to know how you're doing. If you need to tap out, please communicate with me, check in with me, all of that. And I think that my communication skills in that way and patience have really grown because of this kind of opportunity and engaging with more people. So it's definitely, patience is a huge part of overseeing a project like this. And actively communicating with people. I think also not internalizing things. So when things do go wrong, when there are moments where we need some kind of restorative process or not, because abusers cannot engage in restorative processes. So not internalizing things. So trying my best not to make it like this ended up happening and it's a reflection of me and I'm such a failure and I'm a bad person. I do my best not to do that either. So I think being very organized is also very helpful and trying to stay on top of things. And honestly, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to make it happen. And I'm very realistic with myself that I need to move at a pace that honors my well-being, my mental health, and everyone else's. So if that means we're moving really slow, then we move really slow. And that's totally fine with me as long as we're doing what makes us feel good and we're bringing these projects to light. That's pretty much the fucking that's it. That's the thing, and hopefully continuing to grow it so that like we can get funding and people can give us money to make projects and we can expand the projects that are on the network, and so that it can eventually be a much, much bigger thing, because we don't have enough spaces where specifically Black, queer, and trans projects and sex working related projects or a sexual health, whatever projects by Black folks and BIPOC folks in general are really held and affirmed. There are things for like Black folks, but it ends up being like Black cis het folks. So it's like trying to make this space for folks who are not being valued and seen. And that's the goal, and I just want it to grow ultimately.
I love that. I love sex workers in charge, and I think it's going back to something you said earlier that, you didn't even identify as a sex worker until people started putting that onto you. But that's because they recognize your power between marketing, organizing, producing. They recognize all that and they're like, oh yeah, that's a sex worker. And so, Raquel, we've been here for the hour and I'm so pleased to have you. And of course, this podcast is about sex technology. So I have to ask a few of those sex tech questions to wrap up our episode here. So I believe that so many people intersect with sex technology. At the Women of Sex Tech, we are an organization that acknowledges the challenges that women and marginalized genders face when it comes to navigating anything around sex and anything around tech. This is advertising, censorship, just using fintech processors, editing things online that have to deal with sex. I mean, it's a big umbrella. And so my big ask for you is, how do you think your work intersects with sex technology, and what do you want to see in the future of sex tech?
Yeah. I don't know why, but I'm always like so confused around like what sex tech is. And I don't know if that's just because there's a missing link like in my brain that it has not made it connect. Because what you just said was very clear, but I'm still like, I don't know what xTech is. But I mean, everything I do is online and all of the services that I offer are online. So that feels like tech. And I mean, more specifically, yeah, all of the services that I offer are literally are online, and whether it be my personal brand where I'm doing like my Patreon and I have my educational videos, blog posts, live streams, whatever, whether it be where I'm doing like products promotion and shit that has to do with, you know, like adult toys and lube and whatever else, that kind of shit. Kink Media Group is fucking online. Zep Wellness, the nonprofit, all of our services for sex workers are also online. So yeah, everything that I do has to do with online. So I'm assuming that that's like the intersection is that I'm online, bitch. I think when I think about like the future of sex tech or just like technology being safe for sex workers in general, and as an extension, sex workers in general, I would like to be able to exist online without fear of censorship and suspension. I have been shadow banned on all of my platforms for years. And I just want to say that I've still been able to build a platform which speaks to how much people want access to this information. And I can only imagine how successful, how much bigger my reach would be if I wasn't fucking shadow. So I want to not be shadow banned. I want to not fear about posting things and them being censored or removed, or ultimately me being removed from that platform, because that largely informs the things that I'm able to post about, and also is why I'm trying to move away from doing things online exclusively, because it's like there's so much shit that I want to be doing and talking about that I can't do it online. So definitely that, like, safety for sex workers, which is existing online. One of the other things that I've also run into is there is, and correct me if I'm wrong, there is nearly no place for me to put content that is sexual and educational in nature, because I can't put it on Patreon because people do use Patreon for like sex work, but they don't support sex work related shit or nudity.
Nope.
So it's not safe there. Can't put it on Vimeo, can't put it on YouTube. I can't put it up on Twitter because they only allow 2 minutes and 20 seconds of a video. And that Twitter is also like not a place where you can like do a series of something. It doesn't feel like a long form series place. There's like nowhere for me to. So when I think specifically of Kink Media Group and specifically Sex Ed, my series Sex Ed, where I'm doing like teaching people about things related to sex, anatomy, orgasms, whatever, and I'm actually showing them how to do it. Meaning, if we're learning about squirting that day, you're going to see somebody squirt. I'm going to show you a vagina. I'm going to show you fingers inside of it. You know, it's educational and it's sex. There's nowhere for me to fucking put that besides porn sites. And that becomes problematic because it's not porn. And it ends up being, I think, confusing for people to be like, oh, I'm going to go watch this video on OnlyFans or other sites. Or rather, let me say this. When people see OnlyFans.com, this is where you can watch that, they're like, oh, it's just going to be porn, because their association is that OnlyFans is porn. Right. And so that means that a large audience is missing out on that information because they're like, I'm too scared to sign up for OnlyFans, or I don't want to be in a porn site, right? Whereas if I could put the shit on YouTube, way more fucking people will watch that shit. So that's definitely, in terms of what I want to see in the future, being able to exist online without censorship and suspension, and then have more opportunities, platforms, whatever, for me to post content that is sexual in nature, but perhaps maybe not porn, without me having to create my own fucking website, because that is like a whole fucking thing. So yeah, that's what I would like to see. Having just related to like sex work, I have other thoughts about like safety and not getting doxxed and bullied and harassed online too, but that's like separate.
That's a whole nother, we could talk about that for a whole nother episode. Yeah. But, you know, Cindy, for real, but Cindy Gallup, you know, talks about this concept of we need a new definition of adult content. And we also, what could be the future and potential of sex, period, if we were able to advertise and actually create like, you know, advertise our products. And so one thing I actually realized we didn't get to talk about, if you have the time, is Zep Wellness. I really, really wanted to give a little space to that conversation because it's something that I really passionately believe in what you're doing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this grow. So I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah. So Zep Wellness is the nonprofit mental health organization that I started in 2019, we started to offer services in 2020. And so 2020 was our first full year of offering services. Similar to Kink Media Group, it is a nonprofit organization for and by Black and queer folks, sex workers, survivors. Yeah, Black and queer, trans. Yeah, all like us, right? And that is really important to me, again, for the same reason of when I graduated with my master's. I was like, I'm not about to go work at an organization for white people and serving white people. That's not about to fucking happen. And then I went and got an internship somewhere, and on the biopsychosocial form that we used to ask clients questions, one of the questions was, what was it? It was something about like, have you ever sold sex and something for drugs or something like that? And I was like, this is not, we're asking people this. And it was just like, in such a negative, disgusting way. And I think even as someone who has been to therapy and has experienced specifically like victim blaming, right? Like I've seen therapists and they're like, well, why were you, whatever. And I'm talking about when I've been assaulted, and I'm like, these spaces are not meant for us. Yeah. And we need them the most. So I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna just start my own organization then, bitch. Like this is gonna be literally, quite literally, for us, by us. And I'm really excited about this nonprofit in general, because I think it's so necessary and so important. And it's just, I'm really excited about it. But so we offer, all of our services are free. We offer free therapy. Specifically, it's trauma-informed therapy. So I do EMDR and TIR, which are two techniques that help people process trauma. We just hired a new therapist who also does TIR, is a Black woman. So we do free trauma therapy. We do free yoga twice a month online, which is facilitated by Norma. We do a sexual assault healing class, which is led by Leah, and that incorporates holistic kind of things. We have a sex worker support group, which is online, which is co-facilitated by me and Angie, who is also a therapist and kind of works in the sex worker kink-friendly world. We're going to be adding to that an art class, which is going to be queer and trans-friendly, where folks get to redefine and artistically draw their genitals and just name them and just feel awesome about their genitals. And then the last thing that we do is we have a rent relief program for Black trans women who are sex workers, and we give out $500 a month in rent to one sex worker every month. Okay. So yeah, and the goal is to grow the organization so that I can offer more services. I have other things that I really want to do and I think are important. This is where we are now, and I'm happy with what we're doing so far. And yeah, I think it's so important, and I'm just like so excited to be able to facilitate offering these services to people. And I hope that people think that they're really useful and that we do a good job and really center the needs of the community and are able to show up for folks.
Listen, y'all, Raquel Savage is the fucking truth. Listen, I just like on every single level, and we are going to link below in the notes how you can donate to Zep Wellness, okay? Well, Raquel, I don't want to let you go, but I'm going to have to let you go. And I'm so happy to have you here on the Thot Leader podcast, where we are demystifying and destigmatizing conversations around sex and sex technology and sex work. So is there anything else you'd like to tell us, and any way that we can continue to support you and follow you and all the things?
Yeah, I mean, definitely follow me on Twitter and Instagram if you want to see what the fuck I be doing. Raquel Savage, Raquel Savage on Instagram, Raquel_Savage on Twitter. And then Kink Media Group, you can follow us as well to find out the shows that we have on there. I'll have you like link that as well. And the same thing for Zep Wellness Center. Definitely at minimum, show up, support us. If you're able to give funds, that would be awesome. The funds go directly to the people who are facilitating the services and directly towards the rent relief program.
You've been listening to Thot Leader Pod. This episode was hosted, produced, and directed by me, SXNoir. Edited by RJ Junker, and our theme music is composed by Valley Latini. Please make sure to rate, review, and share with a fellow thought leader. Look out for exclusive merch coming soon. For more details about our guests and their work, check out our links in the description. For updates, sign up for the newsletter at SXNoir.com and follow at SXNoir and Thot Leader Pod everywhere on social media. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.